Brynner heard the laughter before he saw the circle of young extras surrounding John Wayne, their voices carrying the casual cruelty of men who had never understood the difference between speed and purpose. Summer 1962, Warner Brothers' Western backlot, Stage 9, 97 degrees in the California sun, and America's most beloved cowboy was about to discover he had a defender he never expected. If you're fascinated by untold stories of Yul Brynner's legendary moments defending Hollywood's greatest icons, subscribe to Yul Brynner Untold Legacy for more hidden encounters where true respect revealed itself when legends needed it most. The 55-year-old Wayne stood in the center of the group, his massive 6'4" frame still imposing despite the weight of age and countless films. His hands, weathered from 3 decades of drawing prop guns, moved with the deliberate precision of a man who had perfected his craft through repetition rather than speed. But to the 20-something extras who surrounded him, that deliberation looked like weakness. "Come on, Duke," called out Tommy Martinez, a cocky stunt double who had worked exactly 3 Western films. "My grandmother draws faster than that. This is 1962, not 1932. Audiences want to see some real speed." Wayne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. He had been dealing with young punks for 40 years, had watched them come and go while he remained. But today, something about their attitude felt different. More personal. More cutting. "Show 'em how it's really done, Bobby," Martinez urged his friend, a 24-year-old extra named Robert Chen who had spent 6 months studying fast-draw techniques in his garage. "Show the old man what real gunfighter speed looks like." Chen stepped forward with the swagger of youth, his hand hovering over a nickel-plated Colt .45 that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Everything about his stance screamed performance, showy, flashy, designed to impress rather than function. "Watch and learn, Duke," Chen said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "This is how they do it in the real world." His draw was impressive by any standard. Smooth, quick, flashy enough to earn gasps from the gathered crew. The weapon cleared leather in under a second, spun twice around his finger before settling into firing position. It was exactly the kind of exhibition shooting that looked spectacular on screen and meant absolutely nothing in any real situation. 0.8 seconds, Martinez announced, consulting a stopwatch he had produced from nowhere. "Not bad for a Tuesday afternoon. Your turn, Duke. Let's see if experience can beat youth." John Wayne looked down at his own weapon. A well-worn Colt single-action army that had appeared in more films than most actors. No fancy grips, no custom modifications, just a working tool that had served him faithfully for decades. His draw, when it came, was exactly what everyone expected. Deliberate, controlled, professional. Not fast by modern standards, but absolutely reliable. 2.1 seconds, Martinez announced with mock disappointment. "Ouch, maybe it's time to hang up the guns and let the younger generation take over." The laughter that followed was cruel in its casualness, the kind of dismissive amusement that young men directed at anything they considered outdated. Wayne's face remained impassive, but something in his eyes suggested he was feeling every one of his 55 years. "Hell, Duke," Chen added, emboldened by the group's response. "Maybe you should stick to playing grandfathers. Leave the gunfighting to guys who can actually handle iron." That's when the laughter died. Yul Brynner stepped out of the shadows, cast by the soundstage equipment, his black clothes, making him seem to materialize from nowhere. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each step deliberate and controlled, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere of the entire gathering. "Interesting demonstration," Yul said, his accented voice cutting through the sudden silence like a blade. "Very entertaining, very educational." The young extras turned to face this unexpected arrival, their cocky expressions faltering as they recognized one of Hollywood's most imposing figures. Yul Brynner didn't just command attention, he demanded it, without ever raising his voice or making a threatening gesture. "Yul Brynner," Martinez stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. We were just having some fun with Duke here, nothing serious." "Yes," Yul agreed, walking closer to the group. "I could see that. Fun. at the expense of a man who has forgotten more about this business than you will ever learn." His dark eyes moved from face to face, cataloging each expression, each nervous gesture, each attempt to avoid his gaze. When he was satisfied that he had everyone's attention, he turned to look at John Wayne with something that might have been respect. "May I?" Yul asked, gesturing toward Wayne's holstered weapon. Wayne nodded silently, understanding passing between them without need for words. Yul accepted the Colt with the reverence due a sacred object, examining it with the attention of someone who understood that tools revealed the character of those who used them. "This weapon," Yul said, holding it up for everyone to see, "has been drawn in anger more times than any of your pretty toys will ever be. Not in real fights, though Mr. Wayne has seen his share of those, but in service of stories that mattered. Stories that taught audiences what courage looked like, what honor meant, what it cost to stand up for what was right." He looked directly at Chen, whose nickel-plated showpiece suddenly seemed garish and inappropriate. "You draw in 0.8 seconds. Very impressive. Very fast. Very much like a circus performer who has mastered a trick." Yul's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow carried more authority than any shout. "But you count seconds. Duke sees only the target. Your speed is a show. His is destiny." The words hung in the desert air like a judgment that could not be appealed. Chen opened his mouth to protest, but something in Yul's expression made him reconsider. "You want to know about real speed?" Yul continued, still holding Wayne's Colt. "Real speed isn't about how fast you can draw. Real speed is about how fast you can decide, how quickly you can commit to action when action is necessary, how rapidly you can choose between right and wrong when the stakes are life and death." He gestured toward Wayne, who stood watching the entire exchange with the quiet dignity that had made him an icon. "This man has made that choice 1,000 times. On screen, yes, but also in life, in war, in personal conflicts, in moments when lesser men would have chosen the easy path instead of the right one." Yul handed the weapon back to Wayne with a slight bow of respect. "Your generation measures everything by speed, by flash, by how quickly you can impress people who don't matter. Duke's generation measured things by results, by whether the job got done, by whether you could be counted on when everything went wrong." Tommy Martinez found his voice, though it lacked its earlier bravado. "We didn't mean any disrespect, Mr. Brynner. You were just doing what young men have always done," Yul interrupted, mistaking technique for wisdom, confusing style with substance, assuming that because something is new, it must be better. He looked around the circle of chastened extras, his gaze settling on each face long enough to make its owner uncomfortable. "But let me tell you something about the man you were mocking. John Wayne has drawn his weapon in more hostile situations than any of you will ever face. Not on movie sets, but in places where hesitation meant death and showmanship meant nothing." "The war?" Chen asked quietly. "The war?" Yul confirmed. "And afterwards, in situations that required a man to stand up when standing up was dangerous. When being fast mattered less than being right. When looking good mattered less than doing good." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the group. "You practice your draws to impress directors, to win competitions, to show off at parties. Duke learned his draw to protect people, to serve something larger than himself, to be someone audiences could believe in when they needed heroes." The silence that followed was complete. Even the normal sounds of the studio, distant hammering, machinery, conversations from other sets, seemed to have stopped in deference to the moment. Finally, John Wayne spoke, his distinctive voice carrying across the soundstage with quiet authority. "Boys, I appreciate Mr. Brynner's words, but he's giving me too much credit. I'm just an actor who's been lucky enough to work with good scripts and better directors for a long time." He looked directly at Chen, then at Martinez, his expression neither angry nor hurt, but simply sad. "But I'll tell you this, speed isn't everything. In this business or any other. What matters is showing up, doing the work, and treating people with respect, even when they're too young to understand why that matters. Yul nodded approvingly. Especially then. Wayne holstered his weapon with the same deliberate motion that had drawn mockery minutes earlier. But now, somehow, that deliberation seemed like wisdom rather than weakness. Like the careful, considered actions of a man who understood the weight of what he carried. Now, Wayne continued, if you boys are finished with your demonstrations, we've got a picture to finish. And I suspect your directors are wondering where their extras have gotten to. The group began to disperse, their earlier swagger replaced by something that might have been shame. But before they could escape entirely, Yul's voice stopped them. Gentlemen, he said, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. In the future, when you encounter someone who has earned their place through decades of service, you might consider showing respect instead of ridicule. Not because they're perfect, but because they've paid prices you haven't had to pay. He looked specifically at Chen and Martinez. And remember, today you mocked a man's speed. Tomorrow you may need his wisdom. Choose your targets more carefully. The extras left without another word, their lesson learned in the most direct way possible. When they were gone, Wayne turned to Yul with a slight smile. Didn't need to do that, Wayne said simply. Yes, Yul replied. I did. They stood together in comfortable silence for several minutes, two legends who understood each other without need for explanation. Finally, Wayne extended his hand. Thank you, he said. Yul shook it once firmly. Thank you for being worth defending. Years later, Tommy Martinez would describe that afternoon as the day he learned the difference between being good at something and being great at it. In a 1978 interview, he said, I thought being fast made me dangerous. Yul Brynner showed me that being respected made you powerful. And John Wayne had earned respect in ways I couldn't even imagine. The interviewer asked what had changed his perspective. Understanding that some things are more important than speed, Martinez replied. Integrity, consistency, the ability to be counted on when it matters. Duke had all of that. I had a fast draw and an attitude. Guess which one lasted longer? Robert Chen, interviewed for the same article, remembered the lesson differently. I was showing off for a man who had nothing left to prove. Making fun of someone whose worst day on screen was better than my best day anywhere. Yul Brynner didn't just defend Duke. He taught us what real strength looked like. John Wayne himself never spoke publicly about the incident, but a note found among his papers after his death read, "Had an interesting afternoon on the lot. Some young hotshots thought they could teach an old dog new tricks. Yul set them straight without raising his voice or drawing a weapon. Made me remember why respect is earned, not given. Good to know there are still people who understand the difference." Yul Brynner, when asked years later about his friendship with Wayne, said simply, Duke represented something important. The idea that a man's word meant something, that showing up and doing your job mattered, that treating people decently was more important than being the fastest or the flashiest or the most fashionable. In a business full of people pretending to be heroes, he actually was one. This story reminds us that true greatness isn't always measured in speed, flash, or youth. Sometimes it's measured in consistency, integrity, and the respect earned through decades of showing up and doing the work. John Wayne represented an older model of masculinity, one that valued substance over style, character over charisma, doing right over looking good. The young extras that day learned something valuable about the difference between technique and wisdom, between being impressive and being important. They discovered that mocking someone's apparent limitations often reveals more about the mocker than the mocked. Most importantly, they learned that real strength sometimes comes not from being the fastest or the youngest or the most technically proficient, but from being someone others can count on, someone who serves something larger than themselves, someone who earns respect through character rather than demanding it through performance. If this story of one legend defending another resonated with you, Yul Brynner Untold legacy preserves exactly these kinds of moments. The encounters where Yul Brynner's deep understanding of what truly mattered intersected with Hollywood's tendency to value flash over substance. His respect for authentic greatness, his willingness to defend those who had earned their place through service rather than self-promotion, and his ability to teach important lessons without humiliating those who needed to learn them revealed the depth of character that made him more than just a movie star. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to discover more stories where the man behind the legend showed what it meant to stand up for what mattered, to recognize greatness even when it wasn't fashionable, and to understand that some things, like integrity, respect, and authentic achievement, never go out of style. Because some lessons about character and courage can only be learned from those who've lived them completely.